Okay, good. I don't want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, fellows and everybody. You guys are going to watch this from all time zones. Welcome again to another edition, brainstorming edition of the SAI Fellows Program. Today, we're going to get into matters of leadership, diversity, and inclusivity, okay? We've taken a really wonderful journey, I think a wonderful journey from the beginning. It's been absolutely amazing the last couple of weeks talking about problem solution fit, talking about evaluation, talking about content, and really just exploring all these elements as you all are building these initiatives and programs around the world. And today's topic, I think, is critical because you are leading these efforts, okay? You are taking intentional action to bring about change out there, right? And there's a lot that is under your control. There's a whole bunch more that is not under your control. And so as a leader, you have to be aware of all these things and take intentional steps, right, towards executing action and then hopefully change out there in the world. So the question becomes, how do you do this, right? How do you think about what mental model should you have to explore these topics? And I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Nelson today, because she has seen me at the beginning of this entire thing. I'm talking about, I was an undergraduate visiting Stanford, okay? Just visiting Stanford. And that's where I met Dr. Nelson, who, with her and Anika Green, whom you don't know, but she's a two fantastic people, encouraged me to apply to Stanford, and that changed my whole journey in life. So she's very special, and it's just fantastic to see her journey. She was at Stanford as assistant dean for a really long time. And again, she was responsible for me going there, and then left Stanford, went into biotech. And I think you're going to tell us your journey as well, Dr. Nelson.
Yeah, I'm happy to do the quick run through and everything. And thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Mwindi. It's amazing, you know. Please, everyone, I'm Dr. Tenea Watson-Nelson, but please just call me Tenea. And it's really an honor to be here today and work through this exercise with you. It's really amazing what you've all have come to develop, you know, and the mission that you have for what you're doing. And I want to work through an exercise called the Waters of Systems Change, which helps us take a look at the different programs or initiatives that we're developing as social change agents, and really kind of figure out where are the different areas and ways in which we can have influence towards that change. Just super briefly, I want to say, like, you know, I was informed this was really casual, which is wonderful for me because I'm a super casual person. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, or you want to come in with your own experiences, please go ahead and do that and share. We're a really small group today. So, you know, if you want to chat me, that's fine. Or chat the group, that's more than welcome. I'll monitor the chat. But if you do just want to speak up, you know, go ahead and we'll come forward. This is a safe space. I always come in to try to say that, which means that, you know, this is a learning space. And so anything that you say, we understand comes from a place of learning, but also if there's at any time, any type of harm occurs, and we'll acknowledge that, and we can work towards how to rectify that. So we don't really get that many opportunities to have that, you know, particularly in the spaces that in the spaces that we move, in the realms that we move in, particularly in STEM and other fields. And so this is that opportunity to really have those conversations where we can look externally at issues, but also reflect internally as well. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, great. So yeah, as Dr. Mwindi mentioned, and I'm so like, who's Dr. Nelson? Who's Dr. Nelson? But anyways, as you mentioned, I actually started out my career in biotech. I have a PhD in toxicology from the University of Rochester. And that's what actually brought me out to California. Was I first started my career in biotech, working at Genentech and Gilead. And it was working in those companies that I really recognized that the need for diversity and inclusion in STEM was, I guess, much greater than I thought. I thought, oh, in undergrad, I was like, oh, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. That kind of thing. And I was like, you know what, there's still a real need here. And how can I make impact? And so that's when I moved over to Stanford University, where, as mentioned, I was assistant dean for diversity and inclusion for, I don't know anymore how long. I worked at Stanford for over a decade. And in that, I worked in the School of Medicine. I also worked in the School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. And from there, I stepped into the consulting world. And right now, I do just that. I consult with different organizations, both, for-profit and nonprofit organizations, to kind of move corporations through the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with all that said, let's get started. I'm gonna kind of speed through the beginning slides just so we can really get to the real juicy, meaty part of this. That's the more fun part. So if you'll just bear with me. So, as we mentioned, you all are social change agents. I just cut and paste some stuff off of your website talking about, how you want to build the next generation of informal STEM focused programs, how you want these programs to be impactful and sustainable. I really like the sustainable part that you have there, and that you're using outside the box ideas, and you've identified the communities that you want to serve, folks who are traditionally underrepresented and underserved. So all this work that you're doing is the work of social change. And so how can we, as social change agents, increase our impact? Very oftentimes when we think about programs or initiatives for equity or inclusion, we often are like, okay, you know what, let's build this thing, and it's, we believe it's going to work. We're going to see what's going to happen. And to be honest, when I first started out in the DEI world, that was a lot of what it was. It was a lot of if we build it, they will come. And that didn't always happen. A lot of times it didn't. And so it's really kind of self-reflecting back and saying, well, what do we know about the greater social environment in which we are bringing this program into that will influence how this product will be used? And so that's how we're going to move and flow through this really incredible publication that some folks at FSG, a nonprofit, have put together. They are really working to understand, oh, I don't want you to see that. I'm trying to move around. So how they're really looking for folks to understand, how can we move forward our work of culture shift and culture change with awareness of the systemic and historical forces at play. They have this example that they use. It's one fish swims up to another fish and is like, oh, how's the water today? And then the reply from the fish is like, what water? That kind of thing. So that's what we want to do, is we really want to understand, what is this ocean? What is this water that we are swimming in, and that we are looking to have our influence and impact and kind of change in? And so what's happening, or what the kind of suggestions or conclusions of this article are, is that folks can really be successful on having influential and sustained change in their desired area of impact by focusing on less explicit but more powerful conditions of change. And also something that they really point out is self-reflection as well. And part of that is thinking about what are the conditions that are holding the problem in place. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions about what we just kind of breezed through? If you do, like, totally, just let me know. We can back up, we can pause. I hear my voice every day, so I'd love to hear, some new voices and new perspectives too at any time. Please feel free. And I'm probably going to start pestering a little.
and it feels weird to say Dr. Nelson, so I'm
You can
gonna
call me
say
Tenea, please.
Tenea. So it's for everybody, Tenea. Okay, she's awesome. I was gonna say that I love how intentional you are with even just pausing and saying, "Does anybody have questions?" If you have questions and you want to ask in chat, feel free to do that. You want to raise a hand, do that as well. And for all the fellows, notice that intentionality, right? In your own programs, you're going to have to be intentional. You're going to be asking yourself, who do I want in this space? Are those people coming here? How am I being intentional about who I am reaching out to, right? So intentionality is really important. And I just noticed it from Tenea, and it's just wonderful. Just want to bring that up there.
Thanks for pointing that out. Actually, this is actually part of what we do with diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of the workshops that we bring forward, we have to draw people into a space that's often uncomfortable, and so that's where some of these techniques come from. I'm also going to keep an eye on time because I will totally go off of topic here, and we'll get like a whole lesson in something else. So let's jump back to the 6 conditions of systems change. Let's start with the first conditions that are at the top of the inverted triangle here. These are all conditions that are part of explicit structural change. So those are policies, practices, resource flows. These are the kind of things that when we think about what can we do to improve our condition, for example, like what can we do to improve underrepresentation, or improve the representation of folks from underserved and underrepresented communities in STEM, right? The first kind of things that we go towards thinking about are like, oh, well, one of the things we really think about is like practices, right? Oh, we can create this program. We can have this, conference. We think about like different practices that we can move forward. And we also think about resource flows, which is like money. Where can we get the money to do this? How can we get funding in? Those kind of things. And then we also think about policies. What are the rules around this that we might be able to modify or change or put in place? I'm thinking, as we think about structural change and thinking specifically about the different projects and initiatives that you're working on, I'm wondering, can anybody provide like an example that comes to mind for any of these policies, practice, or resource flow areas?
I'll try.
Sure.
If I'm thinking about the sort of problem that I'm trying to solve, which is there's a lot of communities that aren't trusting of legitimate science information for various reasons. And so I think a lot of the tools, including mine, are aimed at different practices, like how do we get better information out there, or can we like frame it in a different way that's more easy for people to trust, or how do we need to talk about the experts in a way that they can be trustworthy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to comment on a couple of things that you just mentioned, but before I do, does anyone else want to put forward an example of either policies, practices, or resource flows that influence the way that you flow through you think about your project?
I would add, since Kayleen spoke about practices, I would say resources is really important for the community that I work in. So I work with middle school students in Jamaica. And so a lot of them are from inner cities or underserved communities. And so one of their major problems is the lack of resource of books and pencils and very basic stuff. So I think about how do I get funding to supply that to complement the program that I'm doing, to try to equip them with the necessary 21st century skills that they would need to thrive, navigating either school or just work or life as they grow.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, how do we get the resources to the folks that are going to be participating in our programs? You know, some of it can seem pretty simple. Some of it really isn't. There can be a lot of barriers at play in terms of resource flows. And as we think about the barriers for structural change, I think is your name Kayleen? Am I saying it right? The way that Kayleen was mentioning some of the kind of barriers that they're working through, it actually goes a little bit deeper into the semi-explicit and implicit changes as well. So when we're thinking about the semi-explicit conditions, we are thinking about relationships and connections and power dynamics. You know, so with Kayleen, you're talking about, you know what, a lot of the community that I'm working with don't trust medical professionals. Well, you know, what are the relationships and connections between the community that you're working with and medical professionals? You know, what is that dynamic? How do we think about that dynamic and what we might be able to change or influence within that dynamic? Or just understanding that that's a significant barrier that might be there. Mm-hmm. Or with Britannia, thinking about, okay, resource flows, we need to get just, you know, writing utensils for folks and other supplies for learning. What are the relationships and connections that the students or the school or whomever you're partnering with have with the folks providing the resources, and how do we further develop those relationships and connections? You know, another one is the power dynamics. We have to think about that too, kind of who's in power, who kind of holds some of these systems in place, and how do we work with those individuals, organizations, or groups so we can further modify policies, practices, resource flows to, you know, to get it to a place where we can, you know, positively move or change the system. So in those instances, it's kind of like, okay, well, who are we? If we're talking about folks who are, you know, interfacing with the medical community, who are we, who, you know, what connections or what power dynamics are at play in terms of the community trusting medical professionals understanding as well, like, you know what, we need to speak in a language that people understand and come from a place where people can trust us, you know, and it's not just terminology, but it's also kind of how we approach communities. There's a you know, a social kind of there's a social, what do you call it, environment in medicine that may not translate to how a community environment socializes. And so how do we have those, you know, how do we affect those power dynamics or understand those further? How are we ourselves, can we look at ourselves and recognize what power dynamics we have and we play in terms of the communities that we're working with, and in terms of the, you know, the partners that we have. And then the final condition are the mental models. And that is, you know, what are the mindsets that people in communities have that can kind of keep the barriers we find in place. So, you know, for example, it's, well, you know what, there just aren't enough minorities that are willing to participate in clinical trials. Like, just like that kind of mindset, for example. Or I'm trying to think other mental models. I don't know. Like if anybody can help me think of a mental model.
For mine, I'm thinking maybe like for the downstream audience, there's things like scientists only are doing their work for money. They're making a lot of money doing the work that they're doing. And that the attitude is they don't care about me or my family. They just care about their own thing.
Yeah. So understanding, how people think, how that plays into all of those things: relationship, connections, power dynamics, policies, practices, resource flows. And mental models, often they are like they can be the most difficult to shift. But when you can shift them, it's like it can become really dynamic in terms of the change that moves forward. A lot of barriers can kind of be reduced or disappear.
And I would add, actually, so for fellows, one way to think about this is the users that you are trying to impart, right? So it doesn't matter the type of user. So whether it's like we've had fellows in the past who have developed science festivals, thinking about, okay, what mental models, right, do they have in their mindsets as they're engaging with this thing that I've created? What are those barriers that they may be running into, right? And how can I be an agent to reduce them so that they can interact, right, with my thing? Because there's a lot of mental models out there, right? We all have them, right, Dr. Tenea?
Yes.
And so we need to be self-aware, but also we need to be aware of those things that are out there.
Exactly.
Right. So
exactly. So I've created a great, for example, I've created a great program I've created this awesome scientific conference that high school students can participate in. But there may be a mental model out there like, I'm not going to apply to this because I don't think someone like me is going to get in. Or I don't think what I say is going to be like grammatically appropriate or whatever. There's those kind of mental models out there. And additionally, on the flip side, the folks who are evaluating, okay, who is going to participate in this, in this conference, kind of, is there a mental model that, okay, it has to be, just grammatically correct in order to move forward? A certain type of grammar reflects on the scientific level of understanding. There's some kind of mental models that we hold that we don't even realize, or and so just kind of really sitting to think about those things too, and asking are the people that we have relationships and connections with, whether it's the folks who will be interacting with the interfacing with your project, or the people who are helping design or fund or move the project forward, like really understanding where they are coming from and what the mental models are, so that we can move through them. So does anybody have any questions about the 6 conditions of systems change before we move over to aspirations? Okay, I'm going to keep going, and please feel free to jump in at any time or chat me. You can even like direct private chat me if you don't want to put something in public. I'm open to all forms of communication. Okay, so we're moving now into like the exercise portion. We kind of moved into it on the last slide, but we're really moving into what the FSG authors identify as the exercise portion of the waters of systems change. And so they encourage folks to think about an issue that you're passionate about or working to improve. And since we're all here today and you all do what you do, I thought it was disparities in STEM involvement. Is that a correct assumption for everyone?
I think it targets, different audiences, but there's kind of a target zone, shall we say?
A target
right?
zone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If you all feel differently, it's fine. We can totally work with different issues as well. But with that said, the next step is to consider what outcomes you would hope to see around this issue in the next 5 years. Like 5 years from now, if everything, wonderfully happened, what would that look like? And really think about how the outcomes that you are looking for are related to the system that you're working in. And what the authors are saying is that you'll probably discover is that the greater outcomes that you're looking to achieve probably require more than just the act of creating a program. And I think you all are recognizing that. You probably know that as you work through your initiatives yourselves. All of the different ways that you are touching those systems change areas. Even if like we're just now kind of learning about those 6 conditions of systems change, I bet you all are interfacing in a lot of those areas already. So based on the aspiration of increasing representation in STEM, what existing elements are reinforcing current conditions? Like what things, what barriers are there that are holding that issue in place? Why do we have, underrepresentation in STEM in the first place? So I invite, can anyone pick one of these 6 conditions, and let's talk a little bit more explicitly about that. We've talked about it already.
Yeah, I would pick probably mental models being one of the big ones, which was kind of at the bottom of that triangle, because I think representation is important, and how much access, like individuals like myself would have to people within the community or access to programs that grant them opportunities. It's not that it isn't available, but they may not know about it. The people aren't like directly reaching them. And so there's a lot of, like you said in the beginning, we create these things and they're there, they exist, but are we reaching the people that we really need to reach in order to, combat this issue or problem of the underrepresentation? Because you're not directly reaching out to them. And so if they can't reach you and you're not directly there, to them, it's like, well, something like that doesn't apply to me. I've never seen or heard of this, so how can I even think about it? And that kind of already just puts up that barrier of this is not where I belong. This is not something I can do. So I would probably say that would be a mental model that I would talk about.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, Tenea, you mentioned that, the folks that you would like to, participate in the programs, they're not being, I guess, as effectively outreached to as would be ideal. And so why do you think that happened? Why do you think that's happening? What barrier is there?
I think one part of that is those who are in charge of the programs that we do, we may not necessarily have the connections in those communities, and we have a perception of what those communities need, right? We think this is the thing they need, but because we aren't having actual conversations and going into the communities, we come with a grand vision of, oh, we're going to create something very new and, big and innovative, but sometimes they just need a simple thing to fix the one problem that they're having. And so I know Fanuel always tells us it's important for us to have these conversations so we really get to know what they need, because it's important that you formulate, your solution around the real problem that they're having, right? And if you're not doing that, then it causes an issue. So I think the connections are a big thing. Like, how are we connecting with them? Are we talking with them regularly? Are we really understanding what they need? Or is it just that we think this is what they need because we read about it or we saw it somewhere or we heard someone say something?
Yeah, that's a really good point that you've brought up. Is there someone else who might want to, who really was impacted or feels like one of these conditions kind of is a jumps out for them as a main barrier to you moving forward in your work?
Hi.
Hi.
So for me, a mental model that I noticed was that people don't think they're smart enough for science. So they just lack interest in scientific activities because they don't think they're smart enough. Science is only for smart people. And I also noticed that when it comes to relationships and connections, scientists are not people that, like my target audience, high school students, would normally interact with. Like, we don't see a lot of them. We don't really learn a lot about scientists in our local institutions. I only got to learn more about them when I left high school. So there is that. And also power dynamics. There's a great deal of respect for like scientists and doctors and medical professionals, but it makes people feel like they're not smart enough to understand certain topics again. So I think those are barriers that I've picked up.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that. And I encourage everyone to really take the opportunity to think about, okay, what elements are barriers to my program being as effective as it could be, even beyond just the program itself. I'm hearing mental models, the power dynamics, relationships and connections. I think a lot of it too is the practices. Why are we interacting this way? It's kind of like, well, this is just how we've done it. And so really examining the practices that we have in place to understand, can it be different? And is there a way that could be different that would therefore improve those relationships and connections, and modify the power dynamics somewhat, those kind of things. Change mental models. Go ahead.
Let me add also, and I'll share this. So I very much consider myself still in this space. The fellows. I'm in this with you guys in building these initiatives. I'm very much in that space. And one area, and I think all of you will run into or already running into, is resource flow. So foundations have a lot of power, right? They spit out these RFPs, and they almost dictate what we should work on, almost how to work on it, right? I think it's just something to acknowledge that we are in that ecosystem. And at times it does influence how we design things, which audiences we target, how we target them, right? How we bring them into our spaces and address some of the challenges. Kayleen today shared a wonderful funding opportunity in our special fellows program channel. And that it reminded me of that as well, right? Seeing that, reading the language there, and I'm like, this is fantastic, right? But when you look at it in the whole scheme of things and all the RFPs out there, funders, man, they have power. It's incredible.
Absolutely. And so how do we have those conversations? How do we have this discussion, outside of the RFP time, to say, hey, funders, the community, we're saying this, or moving through the RFP, it works great in this respect, and it could work better in this other respect. And how do we establish, how do we move through the power dynamics of that to be able to have those conversations about resource flows? So now that we've identified barriers, the next step is to identify strategies for overcoming those barriers or moving through those barriers. So what strategies can move things towards positive change And the second question is, who needs to be involved? And so we can take, you know, let's take exactly what Fanuel was just talking about, resource flows, for example. What strategies can help advance systems change efforts in terms of resource flows and the power dynamics around it? You know, who can be and who needs to be involved? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? What can be done?
I think us as program developers is important for funders to, I guess, listen to, you know, just some of our actual needs. I think funders, many of them are not really connected to the work. I'd like to be honest, they're just, here's the money and do what I think is necessary. And so if they listen to like, okay, yes, to you, this may be the picture that you have, but have you thought about how it looks to this community? Like it may be not novel to you, but it's novel to this community. But because they're not connected, then they don't really know. So I think it's important to listen to us as program developers, because we are trying our best to connect with the community and understand their needs. And so if they get an understanding of that, you know, they could better develop or formulate their RFPs and stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, you're leading me to think, okay, a lot of times when, you know, funders kind of interact with the, you know, the community that the funds are looking to serve, it's kind of at, you know, it's only like a couple touch points, might be like at the end of the program, or they come in and see everybody's presentations or something like that. You know, that's the only time there's the real interaction of the two groups. You know, how can we design our programs to build in, for example, additional touch points, so that as we move through our programs, not only are we getting that real-time feedback, but so are the funders, you know, and that's just something to think about. Does anybody have any ideas around that? I just kind of thought about it. I haven't had deep conversations in my mind about this.
I think getting involved is like getting, when the RFPs are, for example, one strategy could be the funders, for example, involve the community in reviewing them, right? And providing some more transparency around the process involved in the review process of these grants, right? What matters, what doesn't matter? A big one, now this is a big one that I think has been always bugging me for so much time, is the lack of feedback on opportunities. I see Britannia just got the thought. Yes, you're exactly right. A lot of times you don't get any, zero, right? And you guys as leaders, and you're gonna feel this because I've been there, sat there trying to, Tenea, you've been there as well, getting funded, like no comments or something like that. Sometimes you get comments, great. But I think funders, you know, one of the areas they can, just this power dynamics and resource flows is provide that feedback. And yes, I know that it's challenging. You may have hundreds of them, but something, anything to provide that insight. And there must be a way, technological way to do this for those, especially those who make it down further, right, in the process of the review process. So I think there's little things, right? Not a lot, nothing big, little things that you can do consistently that will have a great help for these early stage founders and late stage as well.
Absolutely. Was there anything else? Did somebody want to say something else? Okay, I didn't want to interrupt. If someone was going to say something. Yeah, you know, I'm thinking about reviewers from the communities that are being served. Who's even on the boards of these foundations? Is another way to think about it. You know, as a funder, how would I feel about a program that actually built in touch points where I would have the opportunity to interact with the community that we're serving and receive feedback? That would be an incredible draw for me when I think about it. Or is there a way that, you know, we design the program to receive this feedback in certain ways? Do we have, you know, as we move through the initiative, do we have small, you know, focus groups or something like that where we can get that feedback and make change, you know, mid initiative or mid program, or even if we can't action right away, that's still feedback that we can provide back to the funders, you know, and in addition to informing ourselves. So just thinking about those different, you know, different ways to, you know, as Fanuel said, you know, they can be pretty subtle ways to interface with the system for change. Let's see, what do we have? I think formative assessments, absolutely. Absolutely, you all have the language for it. Wonderful.
Yeah, I hope the fellows remember this language. Very important.
Exactly. So we've kind of looked externally to, you know, forces for change and how to overcome external barriers. Let's take the opportunity to think of internal barriers. So as we think about the aspirations that we have for change, for increasing representation in STEM, to what extent have our own actions contributed to holding the problem in place? Or to what extent has the way that we operate our own program contributed to the conditions that hold the problem in place? This is a tougher one, but I am going to ask, does anybody want to speak on this topic or have an example to share?
I think I can. So as a person with a PhD in science, it's frustrating when people without a science background don't value that or don't care about what you think about a science question, or and so I think it's tough to have the right types of relationships where you're understanding where they're coming from, and even if they don't, you know, give you the respect that you feel you deserve, that doesn't make you treat them differently or kind of ruin the relationship, or just that you keep trying to create those connections and not just sort of say, well, you don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 120%. Thank you, you know, so much for putting that out there. Yeah, like, you know, you worked hard for that PhD, and in the scientific, you know, social circles that you're in, it really means something, you know, and there's a certain like understanding of how that PhD and information you hold is viewed. Yeah. And there's identity around it because you worked very hard for it and things like that. And so what do we do when, you know, communities that we're working with don't care, or they don't place the same value set on it, you know, or they're like, go ahead.
Yeah, it's even the opposite. They're like, oh, so you're just in that group. Now I definitely don't care what you have to say because you're just part of them and you're not part of us, kind of, you know, like it's almost a negative sometimes.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump through because I think it's a really good one. You know, we're talking about like these are barriers. What are some, you know, strategies that we could use to kind of work through those barriers? Does anyone have any thoughts around this? So something that I actually had to, I guess, evaluate or understand is if I'm in, for example, if I'm in the biomedical profession, what is it about the work that I do that is important to the communities that I'm looking to serve? Where is that connection? Is my work speaking to them? And if it's not, is that their problem or is that my problem? You know, how do I, if that is my goal, that's something I need to work to figure out, you know? And so how do I go about ensuring that the work that I do and the way in which I, you know, present information around and everything is in alignment with how folks live their lives. You know, a lot of times I grew up where it's like, you should do this, you should do that, you know, like that's how I made it through the world as a kid. I was told what I should do and what I shouldn't do. And so I came up thinking, you should do this and you should do that. And when humans are being humans, I didn't understand. Like I had to learn, you know, my mom would always tell me, she's like, Tenea, you may be right, but people are going to be people. People are going to people. And like understanding that human component as scientists, as biomedical scientists, like we try to like design that out of our experience, you know? And so understanding like that's an element, that's a factor that we have to include and we have to design in mind. How do I change now the way that I move through this work? And so, you know, I've had to do that, and I found that you know, that really changes things. I can, you know, Fanuel, you know, went to Morehouse as an undergrad, and I remember, did you? Okay, I was like, are you shaking your head?
Oh, no, I'm like dancing.
Oh, you're dancing. I was like, oh no. I'm like, my whole memory, like all of it just like unraveled in a minute there. Yeah, and I remember visiting, you know, visiting Morehouse, coming from Stanford and telling folks like, hey, come to Stanford. And right, and people are like, you know, you're just taking our students to use them essentially, or we're going to send our students there and they won't get any care, you know. And it's like, you know, I think Stanford and a lot of research intensive organizations, I'm not trying to just call it Stanford, kind of rely on that. Well, we are who we are, and why wouldn't you want to come? And so, or we've got this great thing going that we're saying, hey, come be a part of, but, and you don't, and you're hesitant. And so how do we, you know, I had to learn, you know, what is important to folks at Morehouse, what is important to the students, the families, the faculty and staff at Morehouse, and make sure that I brought that information back to Stanford, and I was like, hey, this is what folks are looking for in addition to research funding, because Stanford, like I go there and I'll be like, oh, Stanford's gonna pay for everything, blah, 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 you know, and it's like, that's nice, you know, like that's good, but that's not the whole equation. And so what is it? So I had to learn and really communicate about the communities at Stanford. What is, you know, if someone is coming from Morehouse where they really take care of their students and going to Stanford, how can I ensure that they still have that same community and level of care? How can I, and when I can, I would say to that. And when I couldn't, I had to authentically say where Stanford needed to work, where they needed to improve. You know, how could I remember meeting the president of Morehouse at one time. I think it was the president. I can't recall. I think it was a president, but I met him and he was not impressed until I started mentioning the students that I interacted with by name and what they were interested in and how they participated in our summer research program and how we've kept in touch and And then the president was like, okay, like this is someone who I know is really invested truly in the students. So it was changing those relationships and connections, really working on how do I influence the power dynamics, changing the practices of kind of how we did diversity, equity, inclusion at Stanford. All of that, changing the policies at Stanford. All of those things that we did were in an effort to move forward those, those, I don't know, those waters, or move forward that change. And some of it was successful, and some of it didn't work as well as I wanted to. A lot of it was due to mental models in place. And so I would have to, go back to Stanford and be like, okay, we got to work on this. We got to learn the history of what Morehouse is and what HBCUs are, and who come, what kind of attention they get as HBU students, and work on that side. The summer research program, where I'm saying, okay, you know what, we're going to pair a faculty member with an undergraduate student together in the lab over the summer, so they can visually be there and see how their mental model can change, because you're going to have this incredibly dynamic student in your lab. So those are the things that we kind of had to, navigate and work through. And those are the things that I still navigate and work through in the consulting work I do today. Does anybody have any other thoughts or comments around internal assessments and identifying strategies?
I will quickly add that for the fellows in your logic model workbooks, so this is what Tenea was just talking about. I kept thinking about the assumptions that you're making, right? When she was speaking. So in all of your initiatives, right, you have inherent assumptions. I think it's important that you are aware of what those are, so that you can ask yourself these really hard questions, right? I love what you said earlier, Tenea, like why wouldn't they want to come to Stanford, right? And I think you can frame it also, why wouldn't these users, X users, want to use my program, my tool, or attend my event, right? Because there are assumptions in there that you need to double check with yourself, and really check yourself so that you don't run into that. And as leaders, you guys are going to have to do that, right? You're going to recruit people in your teams, but you're going to have to take that first step to challenge these assumptions, to bring them up to the surface for everyone to see and deal with.
I think one of the assumptions that I have, being a virtual program, is my students have access to internet, which does, initiate a barrier, because a lot of students in my communities may not have that access. And so, that for that reason, they can't participate. And so I'm adding to the limitations that exist. And so I have to ask myself, how can I make that easier? Am I gonna get resources to provide that access for them? So yeah, that was just kind of what I thought about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Sometimes we put, other challenges we build other challenges in the system that we don't, necessarily intend to, or we do it consciously knowing we need to figure a way to make it work. And so with all of that, what's next? What's next? Now that we've identified the problem, we've developed some, some ideas around solutions. How do we move forward? So it's kind of like some of the things that we thought up, some of the barriers, like, are those true? And some of the solutions that we've brought forward, do we think, let's investigate those further and see, like, do we think those will work? That's kind of the first step. And then the second step is, okay, if we've decided, like, these are some interventions that need to occur, how do we build this into the plan that we already have for developing our product or moving forward with our initiative? The next step after that is sharing what you've developed with your stakeholders involved in your issue. This is a great group to, like, talk all of this stuff out, I'm sure, and get feedback, about it, bounce ideas off of each other, that kind of thing. And then surface potential partners with whom you should be more connected to. We've had a lot of conversations today about the communities that we serve. How can we ensure that we're, even more connected to those communities? How can we ensure that the partners that we have from the funding side and the community side are connected? All of those questions as well. in terms of building out the plan. And with all that, I just wanted to say thank you. It's really been a pleasure kind of working through these ideas with you today. Like, you've actually had me thinking about some things and ways that I can move forward in my work differently, or like with greater awareness as well. Does anybody have any questions before we go? Alrighty, then if you have any questions or anything pops up, my email's right there, tenea@watsonnelson.com. And I'm happy to correspond with you. I'm going to try to get your names from Fanuel so I can, I think you're all on the website. I'm going to see how we can link in on LinkedIn or something like that so we can keep in touch.
Yeah, and I think, thank you so much for that, for these insights. So, this week, this is what we're dealing with and talking about is matters of leadership, right? And I think today really kind of opens that up, that discussion more broadly. One of the assignments that the fellows had was to actually watch a previous talk that we hosted, talking about sort of leaping into leadership. And I think today, like all these tips and discussion points you brought up, as I mentioned earlier, as a leader, right, you're going to have to take that step, right? Motivate those who are around you to think about these things, to be intentional. So when you're out there communicating, talking about your initiative, when you're going to a funder, like the question, why doesn't the funders get what I'm trying to do, right? Or why doesn't this stakeholder who is in this, who has access to this community, not allowing me, right? Not getting what I'm trying to do and giving me access, right? You gotta, again, check yourself and assess sort of where you are. What are your assumptions? What can you do to break down the barriers, the mental models? I think today, that has stuck with me today, Tenea, like the mental models.
Yeah.
Because they are really, they're just so insidious, and they're sitting in our minds and other people's minds, and even in the ether out there, that maybe just blocking our progress forward a lot of times. So, but as leaders, you're confronted with all of this all the time. And it's hard. I'll admit this. I'll tell you, it's not easy trying to have to deal with all of this, right? In addition to figuring out, and of course, the logistics. Next week we'll get into a little bit more logistics of things, but the logistics and so forth. But you need to find ways to manage all of this. But I think as a leader, though, you need to be that intentional. The intentionality needs to be there, because I find a lot of people just kind of let it just loose, and hopefully things will be all right by itself. Will figure itself out. No, it won't.
It will.
You need to be intentional with this. Okay. Questions, guys, comments, really anything. Okay, so I'm not seeing much there. I'm going to stick around a little bit here should you want to jump in and chat about anything at all. But again, so we are really running close to the end of the program. Don't freak out. It's okay. It's going to be all right. Okay, so just continue building your initiatives, continue filling out that logic model, the pitch decks as well. Tenea, they will be pitching on the 26th of April. I'll send you an invite. Feel free to stop by so you get to see their final pitches and launches as they head out into the world. But with that, this is great, and thank you so much, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you all. All right, take care, everyone.